Imagine this scenario from our source material for a second. So there's this 35-year-old woman, right? And she starts using one of those GLP-1 weight loss medications.
Right, like Ozempic or Wegovy.
Exactly. And she drops 28 pounds. So on paper, I mean, it is a massive medical success. Her doctor is completely thrilled.
Yeah, that's the dream outcome for most clinics.
But privately, she's actually devastated because her sex drive has just completely vanished and she's entirely lost the ability to achieve an orgasm.
Wow. And, you know, when you look at the biological mechanics of what actually happened to her body during that rapid weight loss, you realize the doctor only looked at a single metric.
Just the number on the scale.
Exactly, just the scale. They completely missed the underlying structural and hormonal collapse that was taking place. It really highlights a critical blind spot in how we approach human longevity.
Yeah, we just equate getting smaller with getting healthier.
Right, entirely ignoring how the biological machine actually functions.
Well, welcome to our deep dive into the source material. We are taking our really dense stack of research today, covering everything from metabolic health to nervous system regulation, and we're cutting through all the biohacking noise.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise out there.
There really is. The goal for you listening today is to understand the practical, proven strategies for longevity vitality. We aren't just looking at what to do, we are breaking down the microscopic mechanics of why these interventions actually work. Okay, let's unpack this.
So the foundational input of that biological machine is the fuel we provide it. And the sources are, well, they're completely unified in their stance on the first step, which is eliminating ultra-processed foods.
Right.
But the underlying reason goes far beyond that oversimplified, calories in, calories out model we always hear about.
Oh, totally. It has to do with how these foods hijack our neurobiology. Max Lugavere's work in the sources breaks this down brilliantly. Ultra-processed foods are explicitly engineered by food scientists with highly specific, completely unnatural ratios of fat, sugar, and salt.
Yeah, the food industry actually have a literal term for this. It's called the bliss point.
The bliss point, right.
It is a mathematical formula designed to just overstimulate the reward centers in the human brain. But to make these foods shelf-stable and obviously highly profitable, manufacturers strip out the heavy, perishable elements.
Namely, water and dietary fiber.
Exactly. And by removing water and fiber, they are biologically dismantling your body's innate satiety mechanisms.
Because your stomach needs those to know it's full.
Right. The physical stretch receptors in the wall of your stomach require bulk water and fiber to actually stretch and send a neural signal to the brain that you are full.
And without sufficient high-quality protein, the body fails to suppress ghrelin, right? The primary hunger hormone.
Exactly. You can consume thousands of calories of processed snacks, but because the food lacks physical bulk and protein, your brain's biological sensors are still, screaming that you are starving.
It's so crazy. And Max Lugavere points out that so many people internalize this as a moral failure. You finish an entire pint of ice cream after promising yourself you would only have a few bites, and you just feel like you lack discipline.
Yeah, the guilt is huge.
But a lack of willpower has nothing to do with it. The mechanism is more like a rigged carnival game where the rings are fundamentally too small to fit over the bottles.
That's a great analogy.
The chemistry is mathematically designed to bypass your off switch.
And the mathematics are actually staggering when you observe it in a controlled clinical setting. The sources highlight this rigorous NIH study conducted by Kevin Hall.
Oh, the metabolic ward study.
Yes. He placed subjects in a metabolic ward and basically allowed them to eat as much ultra-processed food as they desired until they felt full. Because their satiety signals were hijacked, they consumed a 500-calorie surplus every single day.
But then, when he swapped the menu to minimally processed whole foods, keeping the instructions exactly the same, just eat until you feel full, the subjects naturally consumed a 300-calorie deficit. That is an 800-calorie daily swing determined purely by the physical properties of the food. It required absolutely no conscious portion control or calorie counting.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
And the long-term stakes of running that surplus on engineered food are incredibly high. The epidemiological data in the notes demonstrates that just a 10% increase in your total dietary intake of ultra-processed food correlates to a 14% higher risk of early mortality.
Wow.
And a 25% higher risk of developing dementia. The biological tax is just severe.
Which brings us to the other side of the fuel equation. Once we stop hijacking the brain with the bliss point, we can leverage the timing of our fuel. Dr. David Sinclair's research in the sources dives deep into the concept of time-restricted eating.
Right, framing periods of hunger as a hormetic stressor.
Exactly, a biological challenge that basically makes the organism stronger.
The mechanism here relies on two major signaling molecules, insulin and IGF-1. Insulin manages your blood glucose, obviously, but IGF-1, which stands for insulin-like growth factor 1, acts as a systemic growth signal.
So if you are constantly grazing and snacking throughout the day, your body maintains high levels of IGF-1.
Yeah, you are basically keeping the cellular construction crew on the clock 24/7, constantly building.
Yeah.
You never give them a shift off to actually sweep the floors and, take out the trash?
But when you introduce a fasting window, those IGF-1 levels just plummet, and that drop flips a genetic switch. The body realizes food is scarce, so it turns down the growth pathways and activates these ancient survival and maintenance circuits.
Specifically proteins called ARUT1 and enzymes like AMPK.
Right.
Those survival circuits initiate a process called autophagy. This is where the cell essentially, it eats its own debris.
Like a cellular Pac-Man.
Exactly. It hunts down misfolded proteins in the brain, repairs damaged DNA, and recycles senescent zombie cells that cause inflammation. And the calorie study proves how effective this physiological cleanup is in humans.
What were the numbers on that one again?
Subjects who reduced their total caloric intake by 12% slowed their biological pace of aging by 2–3%, which directly correlates to a 10–15% reduction in early mortality risk.
That's huge. And Sinclair himself applied this to the absolute extreme, right? He did a 3-week strict fast where he subsisted entirely on exogenous ketones.
Yeah, 3 whole weeks.
And rather than losing cognitive function, he reported enhanced physical strength, highly active brain function, and unusually deep sleep architecture.
Which is fascinating from a research perspective, but let's be honest, entirely impractical for daily life.
Oh, completely.
A 3-week fast places the average person at severe risk of muscle catabolism. That's where the body starts consuming its own muscle tissue just to get amino acids. So the challenge becomes, how do we trigger that deep cellular autophagy without sacrificing our structural muscle?
And the sources offer a really targeted solution for this called the protein-sparing modified fast, or PSMF. It's championed by Dr. David Jockers. It is a nutritional protocol that effectively tricks your metabolism.
Right. You restrict your daily intake to roughly 800 to 1,000 calories, but you dedicate 150 grams of that to high-quality protein,
while aggressively capping both fats and net carbohydrates at under 30 grams each.
The underlying chemistry of this protocol is highly elegant. Insulin is a storage hormone, right? It spikes in response to carbohydrates and, to a lesser extent, fats.
So by keeping those two macronutrients practically non-existent, your insulin baseline remains completely flat.
Exactly. And without insulin locking your fat cells shut, the body is forced to mobilize stored adipose tissue for its daily energy demands. This produces those same brain-boosting ketones Sinclair experienced on his water fast.
But because you are flooding the bloodstream with dietary protein, you introduce high levels of a specific branched-chain amino acid called leucine.
And leucine acts as the biological ignition switch for the mTOR pathway.
Right, the mTOR pathway.
It's the master regulator of protein synthesis. When leucine triggers mTOR, it sends a loud, unmistakable signal to the central nervous system. We have an abundance of building materials coming in, so under no circumstances should you break down existing muscle tissue for fuel.
That's amazing. It allows you to harvest all the benefits of fasting while preserving your physical structure.
Yeah. The notes include a case study of Vanessa Spina, who utilized this exact PSMF protocol. She systematically lost 13 pounds of pure adipose tissue, pure fat radically improving her metabolic markers, while maintaining every single pound of her lean muscle mass.
And the high protein intake, coupled with the appetite-suppressing nature of ketones, allowed her to do this without fighting those ghrelin hunger spikes we talked about earlier.
Right. That preservation of muscle tissue points to a much larger theme in the research, actually. The muscle itself isn't merely functional tissue designed to, move our skeleton from point A to point B.
Right. It's not just meat.
No, it functions as an active endocrine organ, constantly regulating our systemic health. If nutrition is the fuel, muscle is the chassis.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. When I first read the section on structural integrity from Will Harlow, I actually assumed the metrics he was using were like an old wives' tale.
The walking speed thing.
Yeah, he heavily emphasizes tracking grip strength and walking speed as primary predictors of lifespan. Initially, it sounds completely arbitrary. I mean, wait, grip strength and walking speed. How fast I walk across a grocery store parking lot dictate how long I'm going to live?
It sounds like a stretch until you break it down.
Exactly. But when you view it through the lens of mechanical deconditioning, the logic just snaps into focus.
Yeah, we culturally accept that joint pain and lack of mobility are just the inevitable results of chronological aging. Like, oh, my knees are bad, I'm getting old.
Right.
But Harlow's clinical data shows that the vast majority of osteoarthritis and joint failure is actually caused by the atrophy of the surrounding muscular suspension system.
Wow.
When the quadriceps and hamstrings weaken, they can no longer absorb the kinetic shock of walking. So that impact transfers directly into the cartilage of the knee.
So the joint isn't failing because it is 60 years old. It is failing because the muscular scaffolding meant to protect it has just collapsed.
Exactly. This is why grip strength is utilized as a systemic proxy. Your grip strength heavily correlates with your central nervous system's capacity to recruit muscle fibers globally.
And walking speed, similarly, is the ultimate indicator of your lower body structural integrity and balance.
Right. The statistical correlations are stark. There's a 10-year tracking study that observed a cohort of men in their 70s. Of the men in the fastest walking speed quartile, 86% survived the entire decade.
86%.
Yeah. And among the slowest walkers, only 18% were still alive 10 years later.
That is just mind-blowing. Harlow even notes that when older patients present with chronic joint pain like pain they were told was incurable bone-on-bone aging, he puts them through a targeted strength protocol to rebuild those supporting muscles.
And what happens?
80% of those patients find their pain drastically improves or disappears entirely.
Which brings us right back to the 35-year-old woman we discussed at the very beginning of the deep dive. The one who lost 28 pounds on a GLP-1 medication, but lost all sexual function.
Right.
Dr. Gabrielle Leon's protocol is featured prominently in the sources, serving as a critical intervention for anyone utilizing modern weight loss pharmacology.
And her non-negotiable requirement is that patients on these drugs must consume 1 gram of protein per pound of their target body weight, and they absolutely must undergo heavy resistance training 3 times a week.
Yes. The mechanism behind why this is non-negotiable is fascinating. Rapid, unmanaged weight loss signals extreme starvation to the liver. In a panic, the liver overproduces a protein called SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin.
You can picture SHBG as this aggressive biological sponge that basically floats through the bloodstream, just soaking up all the available free testosterone.
Simultaneously, the GLP-1 medication is fundamentally doing its job. It is altering the brain's dopamine pathways to mute the reward centers, eliminating the desire to overeat.
Right, so the patient is experiencing a pharmaceutical dampening of their neurochemical reward center, while an overproduction of SHBG sponges up the very hormones required for libido.
Exactly. And because they aren't lifting heavy weights or eating protein, they are losing massive amounts of structural muscle, which diminishes the vascular blood flow required for sexual function.
The clinical outcome is a patient who is lighter on the scale, but structurally fragile and endocrinologically bankrupt. For you listening, building and preserving muscle, whether you were doing it naturally through a PSMF diet or utilizing GLP-1s, is never just about aesthetic vanity.
No, not at all.
It is the ultimate organ of longevity. It's the protective armor that dictates your hormonal signaling, your metabolic rate, and your fundamental quality of life.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean? We have the fuel dialed in by managing insulin and mTOR, and we understand the mechanics of our muscular armor. But the sources reveal a glaring vulnerability. You can have perfect nutrition and solid physical armor, but if the command center running the whole operation is fried, the system still breaks down.
Yeah, the final dimension the sources explore is how psychological trauma and chronic stress physically trap the autonomic nervous system. We pull heavily here from the work of Shiliana Ayana and the practice of somatic experiencing.
It is a radical departure from traditional talk therapy.
It really is. The premise is that severe stress, betrayal, or trauma isn't just a memory stored in the cognitive brain. It is a physical charge stored in the body's tissues. It literally freezes the nervous system because the physiological fight or flight cycle was interrupted and never allowed to complete.
Because the human limbic system, like the primal emotional center of the brain, does not process logic or language.
Right. You can logically know you are safe. Your frontal lobe can totally understand the danger has passed. But if the limbic system is frozen in trauma, it will continue pumping cortisol and adrenaline into the bloodstream.
And Ayana's personal case study illustrates this perfectly. After entering a healthy, loving marriage, her nervous system went into severe, inexplicable panic.
She experienced these overwhelming, visceral urges to flee the relationship.
Her limbic system was automatically projecting the danger of past abandonments onto her currently safe environment. Attempting to outthink a limbic response like that is, well, it's like trying to talk yourself out of being cold instead of just putting on a sweater.
I love that analogy. The logic doesn't alter the physical state.
Exactly.
She spent a year engaged in somatic experiencing therapy to bypass the logic entirely. A practitioner would apply light physical pressure, such as holding her kidneys, to encourage the physical release of that stored trauma.
And her body would respond with involuntary shaking, crying, or heat, right?
Yeah, from a biological standpoint, she was physically completing the interrupted stress cycle. Only after discharging that stored physical energy did her nervous system finally register safety.
Which introduces an incredible technological application of this exact physiological principle. The sources highlight the Apollo wearable device developed by Dr. Dave Rabin.
Yeah, this is super cool.
Because touch is the oldest, most foundational sensory pathway to the brain, it can completely bypass the anxious, worrying frontal lobe.
The Apollo device utilizes highly specific sub-200 Hz low-frequency vibrations. The mechanics of this are just brilliant. The vibration stimulates the Pacinian corpuscles. Those are deep touch receptors in the skin.
The notes actually describe the physical sensation as being identical to a purring cat or a deep hug.
That's exactly it. And those specific touch receptors send a direct electrical signal up to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve acts as the biological brake pedal for the human body.
Oh, wow.
When stimulated, it forces the heart rate to slow down, expands the lungs, and rapidly shifts the entire autonomic nervous system out of sympathetic fight or flight and into parasympathetic rest and digest. It is delivering a physical, tactile signal of safety directly to the brainstem.
And the sleep data backing this up is immense. The Oura Ring Company conducted a 3-year study analyzing over 440,000 nights of sleep from people wearing the Apollo device.
440,000, that's a huge sample size.
Massive. On average, users gained an extra 46 minutes of sleep per night. And more importantly, it wasn't just light, restless sleep, it fundamentally improved their deep sleep and REM architecture.
Dr. Rabin actually utilized this exact touch therapy protocol on himself over the course of 7 years to measure its impact on heart rate variability, or HRV.
Right, and HRV measures the microscopic variance in time between your heartbeats. It serves as the ultimate metric for how resiliently your body adapts to stress.
Exactly. And he managed to quadruple his HRV, taking it from a highly stressed baseline of 30 milliseconds up to a highly resilient 120 milliseconds.
Yeah.
He systematically bulletproofed his nervous system's capacity to handle stress.
But you know, for those moments when you are actively in the middle of a high-stress event and you don't have a wearable device, the sources provide a powerful cognitive tool called psychological distancing.
Yes, this is heavily utilized by ultra-endurance athlete Robin Arson and researcher Dr. Ethan Cross. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's about regulating the brain in real time.
Right.
When humans experience extreme stress or physical pain, the default response is to get trapped in a catastrophic first-person mental loop. We tell ourselves, I can't do this, I am failing, I am in too much pain.
Yeah, it's that internal spiral.
Exactly. The psychological distancing tactic requires you to consciously shift your internal monologue from first-person I statements to third-person you statements. You begin thinking, you have trained for this. You can handle this.
It seems like a trivial grammatical trick, but the neurobiology behind it is profound. By changing that single pronoun, you create psychological distance between your conscious identity and the amygdala's panic response.
You are effectively separating the observer from the pain.
Exactly. It turns down the emotional reactivity centers and forces the analytical, problem-solving parts of your brain to engage.
Yeah.
You become your own coach, speaking to yourself with the same calm authority you would use to guide a friend through a crisis.
And Arzon applied this exact tactic during brutal back-to-back 20 and 30-mile ultramarathon training runs.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
Right. When she caught her inner monologue spiraling into, I am a fraud, I am too weak to finish, she realized that linguistic framing was actively spiking her cortisol and breaking down her physical output.
So by consciously shifting her thoughts to you, she distanced herself from the muscular pain, lowered her acute stress load, and successfully completed the preparation.
It is a real-time intervention to prevent the central nervous system from burning out.
For you, the listener, these sources really provide an incredibly empowering toolkit. regulating your nervous system, whether through vibration, somatic release, or just changing a pronoun in your head, lowers cortisol and prevents burnout. Achieving metabolic health and longevity vitality isn't about perfectly adhering to a massive, stressful spreadsheet.
No, not at all.
It is about aligning a biological triad. First, you secure your fuel by outsmarting the engineered bliss points of ultra-processed food and leveraging meal frequency and protein to flatten your insulin and protect your tissue.
Yeah.
Second, you forge your structural armor by understanding that heavy resistance training prevents mechanical deconditioning and hormonal collapse. And finally, you protect the command center by giving your nervous system the somatic, vibrational, and psychological signals of safety it requires to execute cellular repair.
When we view this triad holistically, it leaves us with a truly compelling final thought. We've established that trauma and chronic stress freeze the nervous system by trapping the physical body in an interrupted stress cycle.
Right.
And we've also established that muscular deconditioning drives mechanical joint failure and systemic decline. So if physically completing a high-effort stress cycle allows the limbic system to finally discharge its panic and register safety,
Yeah.
and if lifting heavy weights is the ultimate mechanism for protecting our biological structure, could the very act of building physical strength, of voluntarily pushing our bodies against extreme resistance until the physical cycle is complete, actually be one of the most primal, effective forms of somatic therapy we have?
Wow. It completely changes how you view your next workout. It isn't just building muscle, it is actively discharging the stress of modern life. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope this gave you a few powerful levers to pull in your own life. Stay curious, keep building that armor, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.